Hello. We have been talking about yet the other early Greek philosopher Anaxagoras, and we continue to discuss more about him. We had been talking about his introduction of arche nous, and we will discuss today more about this concept called nous. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, before Anaxagoras, early Greek philosophers were engaged in a common project in finding the fundamental principle arche behind all reality. Thales had talked about water, Anaximenes talked about air, Heraclitus talks about fire and flux, Parmenides talks about being, eternal, unchanging, Empedocles talked about four elements plus love and strife as forces. Now, the search for arche was interesting, and these varieties of arche were typically material substances or cosmic forces, and thinkers were wrestling with the paradox of change and permanence. How can there be change if all being is one and unchanging? For example, Parmenides had said that. Or how can we explain the diversity of the world from a single substance? Anaxagoras chips in here as the most celebrated hero of early Greek philosopher by introducing nous as arche. Anaxagoras responds to this challenge by introducing two core principles. One is everything is in everything, which is the infinite material mixture. He says, all things are made of infinitesimally small particles of seeds. In the beginning, all these seeds were indiscriminately mixed, which has been a primordial state of chaos. There is no generation or destruction, only rearrangement of these elements. But this raises a problem. What causes the mixture to separate? What initiates change? It is here when Anaxagoras introduces nous as the principle that initiates motion in the primordial chaos. Nous is again that principle that brings order and separation to the mixture. Further, nous knows all things and guides the cosmos intelligently. Last but not the least, nous remains pure and unmixed, unlike everything else. So, we see that the nous, which is technically mind or intellect, as the arche for Anaxagoras. In fact, in the fragment B12 of DK, there is a quotation which states, quote, "And nous has power over all things that have life. Nous sets in order all things that were to be and all things that were and are now and will be," unquote. This nous is not just a physical force, it is a rational, purposive, self-moving agent distinct from matter and the first cause of cosmic order. We see that there are certain criterions where nous stands out as the arche, and if we look at the PPT here, the characteristics of nous as arche, we see that the feature of separate and pure, which is nous is unmixed with anything else. It is the only thing that is not part of the universe mixture. This purity gives it clarity and autonomy. Further, about infinite and self-ruling, nous is unlimited in power and knowledge. It is self-moving and not acted upon by anything else, and it is the initiator of motion, which means that motion for Anaxagoras begins only when nous acts. This breaks from the Milesian school, which saw matter itself as moving. Further, the characteristic of nous as arche is that it is the cause of order and differentiation, and the description is that the separation of the mixture into fire, water, earth, and the formation of worlds and life are the result of nous' organizing power. Also, we do know the rational and purposeful feature of nous. Where nous operates intelligently, it chooses and directs, implying a kind of teleology or purposive design. Now, if we are to see how his Nous are different from earlier arche, or how thus Nous stands out, we have to remind ourselves that for Thales, his arche was water, and that was completely material, and there was no explanations of motion as such. For Anaximenes, it has been air, again material, and the limitation has been that it lacks intelligent direction. For Heraclitus, arche has been the fire vis-a-vis logos, and the nature has been material plus rational law. Limitation has been that logos is not agentive. Parmenides, arche is being, and the nature has been eternal, motionless. Limitation, however, is that it denies change and plurality. Empedocles, if you remember, arche has been the four elements plus forces of love and strife, and the nature has been the plural material elements. However, limitation is that it forces not rational or consciousness. Then comes Anaxagoras with his introduction of Nous, which is immaterial, rational, self-moving, and he introduces mind as cause but does not fully explain its method or goals, and that can be taken as Anaxagoras' limitation. Thus, Nous breaks the materialistic paradigm. It is not a substance, but a principle of order, motion, and intelligence, a cosmic mind. It is arguably the first metaphysical principle that is immaterial and mental. Now, like all other early Greek philosophers, where there have been limitations, there have been criticisms, and for this, philosophy is always open-ended. Anaxagoras too has had certain reservations or limitations of his philosophy. While revolutionary in his own way, Anaxagoras does not fully integrate Nous into his system. For example, Plato criticizes him for mentioning Nous as the cause, but then turning back to material explanations for things. Quoting from Phaedo of Plato, quote, "I had hoped he would explain everything in terms of mind, but he failed to apply his theory of mind to specific phenomena," unquote. Nous initiates motion, but does not always guide the detailed unfolding of the cosmos in a purposeful way, sometimes reverting to mechanical causes. Now, when we talk about the philosophical legacy of Nous as arche and the influence of Plato, we see that Plato adopted the idea of a rational order behind the cosmos, for example, as in the dialogue Timaeus, though he developed it more thoroughly through the world soul and the form of the god. Aristotle developed the idea of a final cause and introduces Nous as the unmoved mover in metaphysics. For the Stoics, he recast Nous as logos, the rational principle pervading the universe. For Neoplatonism, like Plotinus, Nous becomes the first emanation from the One. For the medieval Christian thinkers, Nous, they had used the Nous logos idea to build arguments for divine reason and creation. Now, further in the PPT as being displayed, we see the summary of Nous as arche. The criterion or the role of Nous, we see it initiates cosmic motion and order. Nature, it's immaterial, pure, unmixed, rational. Function, it differentiates and organizes the primal mixture. Relation to matter, it separates from superior to material things. Legacy, first to give mind a cosmic causal status, precursor to metaphysics and philosophy of mind. So, Anaxagoras combined empirical observation with the abstract principle of Nous to explain motion, order, and differentiation in the universe. Nous, thus, is a rational ordering force. It is separate from matter, and it is the initiator of cosmic motion. Thus, while Anaxagoras was a naturalistic, he was not a materialistic in the strict sense. He believed that matter alone cannot organize itself. It needs intelligence, which is nous, which is distinct, pure, and all-knowing. So now if we go back historically a little bit and try to talk about the historical significance as to how did nous actually emerge, or the connect of nous, we see that in Athens he was accused of impiety for calling the sun a hot stone. This shows how radical his views were against traditional religion. Influenced Socrates and Pericles, he laid the intellectual groundwork for Socratic ethics, Platonic dualism, and even modern scientific method. Anaxagoras did not destroy wonder by removing gods from the sky altogether. It is just that he redirected wonder towards rational awe, that the cosmos could be understood, ordered, and explored by the human mind. Anaxagoras influenced Plato, Aristotle, and Stoics through his idea of nous as an active force. He served as a bridge between materialism and metaphysical rationalism. Now again in the PPT that is being displayed here, when we talk about nous, by now we understand that it introduced rational principles as distinct from matter, pluralism, reality composed of infinite substances or seeds. Mechanistic cosmology emphasized natural laws over divine myth. Again, about the epistemology, we do see the contribution of observed limitations of the senses, prioritized reason, and determination with intelligence. The contribution has been combined necessity with purpose, which is nous causes motion. So, about Anaxagoras, finally, we understand that he does occupy a pivotal role in the history of Western philosophy, particularly in epistemology and metaphysics both. He introduced the concept of nous, mind or intelligence, as a non-material, rational principle responsible for order in the cosmos. Simultaneously, he remained aware of the limitations of sense perception and emphasized the role of reason in knowing the world. The core beliefs of the epistemology of Anaxagoras is that the senses are weak but useful. True knowledge requires rational insight, not just observation. Nous is not only a cosmic ordering principle, but also reflects the human capacity for rational thought. Now, the observed limitations of the senses is clearly explained or elucidated by Anaxagoras when he says that by appearances we perceive, by reason we understand. Anaxagoras did not dismiss the senses, but saw them as limited, partial, and prone to deception. For example, we might see the sun as small, but reason tells us it is much larger than it appears. The senses may mislead due to scale, distance, or mixture of substances, but they still offer raw data for reason to interpret. Similarly, the observed limitations of the senses, we understand the key idea of Anaxagoras was that knowledge requires the correction of sensory data by rational reflection. This anticipates later epistemic rationalism, especially in Plato and Descartes. Now, the other point has been that perception through opposites or contraries, and Anaxagoras did propose that we perceive through opposites. We perceive cold because of heat, dry because of wetness, light because of darkness. This implies that sensation arises from contrast, which makes it relational, not absolute. Again, this leads to partial knowledge. We know things not in themselves, but by difference. Logos and explanation. The task of knowledge is to understand the cause of things, what makes the world what it is, what moves it, orders it. Anaxagoras answered the nous as the first cause. So epistemology is deeply connected to cosmology. To know the world is to understand its rational principle. Now, when we come to the metaphysics of Anaxagoras, we see that Anaxagoras was not a material monist like the Milesians, Thales, Anaximenes, nor a radical rationalist like Parmenides. He forged a pluralist metaphysics, introducing the concept of infinite seeds and nows. Now, this infinite seeds again, the world, he had said, is made up of an infinite number of tiny parts. Everything is in everything, and these parts or seeds are qualitatively distinct. These are seeds of flesh, seeds of bone, seeds of gold. So basically, no thing comes into being from nothing. And this very position opposes Parmenides' motion, where change is illusion. Anaxagoras allowed for change as reordering and separation of existing seeds. The world is fundamentally mixed but differentiated by nows. And Anaxagoras was clear that nous has to be the first principle, rather it is the only principle. All things were together, then mind came and set them in order. So nous is not material, it is pure, unmixed and self-ruling. It initiated cosmic motion, making separation, mixture, rotation and growth possible. Unlike other forces, nous knows all things and causes all motions with purpose. And as explained, the properties of nous is infinite, autonomous, pure, omniscient and powerful, rational and purposive, not mechanical. This makes Anaxagoras one of the first teleologists believing in purposeful causation in nature. Now, Anaxagoras was also clear that the cosmos began in a state of undifferentiated mixture. Nous initiated rotation, separating things according to their nature. So, motion for Anaxagoras is both mechanically determined, which is to do with spinning, separating and so on, and intelligently directed through nous. This combination of necessity and purpose makes Anaxagoras a precursor to Aristotle's final causes. Though Aristotle later criticized him for not fully developing the purposive role of nous. So, in the PPT as being displayed here, when we have the synthesis of epistemology and metaphysics together, we will see how some of the questions of philosophy had been answered by Anaxagoras. Now, when asked that what is knowledge, to this Anaxagoras answers that it is the interpretation of sensory data through reason, nous within us. What is real? It is the infinite material seeds plus an immaterial organizing nous. What causes changes? Motion initiated by nous, not chance or divine will. Can we know the truth? Anaxagoras' answer has been partially through the senses, fully through rational thought. So, we do see that the impact and legacy of Anaxagoras goes beyond borders, and from Plato to Aristotle, everyone comes under his fold. With anticipation of Plato's dualism, it is often said that nous as form-like intellect distinct from matter did pave the way also for Aristotle's teleology, the precursor of scientific cosmology. His natural explanations of eclipses in celestial bodies were also revolutionary. And there is also the concern or the submission of epistemic humility, which is the awareness of the limits of sense perception. So, further in the PPT here that is being displayed, we see that the criticism of ambiguity in nous, and the explanation has been that after introducing nous, he didn't explain its continuing role clearly. Aristotle criticized him for using it only as deus ex machina. The problem of infinite divisibility, explanation has been that his theory that everything is everything leads to difficulty in explaining indifferentiation or identity of substances. Now, the criticism of no empirical validation, explanation has been that despite rationally, his cosmology lacked experimentation or mathematical rigor, unlike Pythagorean or later thinkers, and about the reduction of theology, the limitation of the criticism explained by Anaxagoras or by others of Anaxagoras' supporters is that his system does not develop purposive actions clearly, Nous starts motion but does not guide ends consistently. Now that we are through with Anaxagoras' philosophy, we are in a good position to mention some of the sources, primary and secondary, where one can read and learn and connect and engage more with Anaxagoras if one is interested. Now, the primary work on nature, his only book written in Ionic Greek, it is lost, but about 35 fragments survived and mostly preserved by later scholars. We also have the preservations by late authors like Simplicius of the 6th century CE in his work, a Neoplatonist commentator who preserved many fragments and quotes in his commentaries on Aristotle, and there we do see mention of Anaxagoras. Also, the commentator Diogenes Laertius, one of the extremely significant scholar or commentator who did provide a biography in lives and opinions of eminent philosophers, and Anaxagoras does occur there too. In Plato, we do see he mentioning Anaxagoras in Phaedo, where he praises Anaxagoras for introducing the idea of mind, but criticizes him for not fully using it in explanations. In Aristotle, where we see Aristotle discuss and critiques Anaxagoras in metaphysics, and the other work physics and the on the soul. So now we are in this juncture where we should see the intersectionality of early versus later Greek philosophers vis-a-vis Anaxagoras. Now, if we look at the PPT, we see that a philosopher or like Thales and Anaximenes, their relation could have been something which is of shared interest in arche but disagreed with their material monism. Heraclitus, their shared view that change is fundamental, but Heraclitus emphasized logos while Anaxagoras emphasized nous. For Parmenides, it has been he's been opposed to his strict monism but accepted plurality and becoming. Empedocles both postulated plural substances. Anaxagoras, however, rejected love and strife as forces and replaced them with nous. With classical Greek philosophy, we have Plato, and the intersection, as we can see, is that they both embraced nous but criticized Anaxagoras for failing to connect nous with teleology, and Plato's demiurge is a more purpose-driven cosmic mind. Aristotle praised his originality but argued that he failed to follow through. Nous is introduced as a cause of motion and abandoned later. Stoics, we see that their logos resembled his nous, but Stoics gave it a more material and pantheistic twist. Also for Socrates, we see that though not a direct student, Socrates admired Anaxagoras for rational inquiry, though found his cosmology unsatisfying in explaining ethical purpose. Now, in the domain of metaphysics, the contribution that can be gauged is it did introduce nous or mind as active cosmic principle. In the domain of epistemology, it did distinguish between sense, perception and reason, and in the domain of cosmology, it did offer naturalistic and rational explanations for the universe. In the philosophical method, we do see that Anaxagoras did in a way bridged mythos and logos and is a transitional thinker, and with the legacy it prepared ground for Plato's forms, Aristotle's causality and Stoics' rationalism. So this has been the intersectionality of the early Greek philosophers and the later philosophers vis-a-vis Anaxagoras, and we have discussed why and how for Anaxagoras nous has been his most influential and dynamic and revolutionary principle, and he rightly had in his own way proved it to be the RK. Thank you so much.